has everything, every potential to be a big club. For me, it's already a big club, but maybe bigger and bigger club. So we will just make a history with the fans. I have to say that I'm coming from the streets. So for me, I know what is to be a fan of a football club. So I will give everything to make our fans more concentrated, more supportive, and we will try to make history with them.
Hello and welcome to a very special episode of the Tigers Down Under. I'm your host, as always, Alex. And we just heard there from our new owner, Arjun Alajali. So with me, I have to discuss that exciting news. I have Dan. How are you, Dan?
Yeah, I'm good. It's good to be back 24 hours after my
24
last
hours,
appearance.
yeah. And I've also got Logan. How are you?
Alex, doing well. I think I'm most impressed at how much you've been working on your pronunciation of how to address the new owner's name. I was very intrigued to see how you were going to say it, and it seems like you've been practicing.
Yeah, you know what? I actually, just before we went to air, I had a quick Google of it just to triple check that I was saying it correctly, because it is a tricky one. We've heard a few different pronunciations of it, but I think that seems to be the way to go. Look, let's crack into it, because we've been sort of saying for weeks now. I think I've had both of you boys on episodes where we said any day now the takeover is going to go through, any day now, and we've been waiting. We've had dates that we think it's going to happen, and it's finally gone through overnight Australian time before the game against Blackburn this morning. Starting with you, Logan, I guess. What are you feeling? What are the emotions? The Alum regime has finally come to an end. It's finally happened. We've had a few false dawns before this, and it's finally happened. So how does it feel?
Yeah, I think it's a really good question. It's one that you kind of I was thinking about on the way to work this morning, just trying to process the ebbs and flows and the false starts, and just I guess what it means to ultimately the fans. Like that's the first thing that just keeps coming back up for me is, regardless of how he turns out to be and what direction he takes the football club, it's just this fresh breath of air that's come in, and there's a real sense of optimism and change that it almost feels like you've been in an abusive relationship for a few years, and I know that's extremely dramatic, because we have to think about it in its entirety. The reigns of the Alums was for quite some time, and there's been some really good things that they've done, and I know not everyone likes to give credit for that because there's a lot of emotion attached, but when they took over in, was it 2014, I believe, or maybe
2011, even longer ago.
Yeah. 2011. We've experienced some pretty impeccable times under their ownership. And so we've got a lot to be grateful for, despite the fact that, things turned out pretty sour. But as I said, I think it's just that renewed sense of optimism around the club and the possibility that the fans will return. And as a result of that, we'll be watching City play in front of, hopefully a galvanized group of supporters. And I think that's the real big thing for me at this point in time.
Yeah, 14,000 this morning, much bigger crowd than I think we've had at previous games. So really great to see. Dan, I mean, the Alums are basically the only owners that you've known for City. I mean, I think you started supporting in that first Premier League season under Bruce.
Yeah.
It must be a bit surreal for you. It's sort of that change of ownership and suddenly this fresh breath of optimism. How do you feel?
Yeah, look, I'm sort of tempered with, I don't know, this sense of relief that, it's finally over, to whether it's that, abusive relationship that's finally ended or what, but, and the sense of anticipation, looking forward to what's to come. I think, Logan made reference to it. There has been, some great times. There's, 3 Premier League seasons, FA Cup final, first foray into European football. So there's lots of good things that happen, but the flip side of that is, the name change fiasco, the concessions, this, that, like everything in between. So it's been a bit of a slog, honestly, for at times through this. What am I close to? What am I, about 8 years or something now?
Yeah,
following.
8 years.
Been a couple of few interesting moments, but some really good ones, and I think looking forward to seeing what's to come, and hopefully, some more really good memories. And I guess one thing we can't obviously forget is that our first league title in 55 years came under the regime of the Alums.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Well, yeah, let's look ahead then. So Arjun's come in. We'll sort of structure this in 3 parts. We'll look at what it means for the club itself. Then we'll look at what it means for the manager currently in charge, and then for the playing squad itself. But yeah, so just starting with the club itself, new owners come in. In that clip that I played just there at the start, it seems that he's got a real emphasis on being one team. Pulling in the same direction. Fans, players, staff, everything pulling in that one direction. Seems to be a great message. Dan, we were sort of saying before the episode, you'd hope he's good at saying the right things. He's a media man, but what do you make of his message and his intentions from what we've seen so far?
Look, I think I guess maybe I come from with following the Central Coast Mariners in Australia, and them being a small community club, and their whole identity has been around engaging with the community, and that's been their strength, and a thing that's kept a club that probably should have folded a few times in the A-League for so long. I find consider it a great strength if an owner and a club can actually really value and engage in their community. So it's all the good things it's a good thing for me to hear that from Arjun. And then I think you just start looking at what are the groups that he starts reaching out and contacting. They've got the trust, and they've got the supporters clubs, and they've got all those things. If he's starts obviously, like, not tomorrow, but within before the end of the season, even if he reaches out to those different groups, those different stakeholders, and says, like, all right, well, I'm here. What do we need to change to get everyone involved so we can have 25,000 at the MKM or whatever its capacity is, week after week? Because I think you said before, like 13.5 or 14,000 there this morning, and that's a great crowd considering where we.
I think we're averaging like 9,000 or something. So yeah,
and I think with a strong result this morning, I think like that, I reckon through the rest of the season that should grow, and I'd expect to see by the end of the season at least a couple thousand more on top of that.
Yeah, that's right. Logan, what are your thoughts on Arjun so far? I mean, I guess not wanting to temper too much of the optimism, but we have heard sort of various comments around his potential ownership of the Fortuna Sittard club, where he was perhaps trying to get quite involved in the playing side of things. He's talked about wanting to bring in the Turkish players, Turkish manager, things like that. Does that worry you at all? Are you sort of happy to sort of give him that benefit of the doubt, see what it actually translates to, what it looks like on the pitch, and just kind of go along for the ride?
Yeah, it's a super interesting one, given the fact that, as Dan said, he's come in, he's certainly said the right things, and he has made a real point of looking to emphasize that relationship with the fans and to try and reinvigorate a pretty divided fan base. I think it's probably fair to say you've got the stayaways, and then you've got the people who have kind of kept going. And we talk about the disconnect that we experience over here in Australia because we don't have the opportunity to go and watch the game at the MKM week in, week out. But because he brings that that mentality, and if he is serious about what galvanizing the fan base looks like, well, I think that there is an element that he is the owner of the club, and we kind of do need to trust that the decisions that he's going to make in the operation side of things is in our best interest. And I guess that the other option of that is, we've come out of a period of very much disliking our owners, and the fact that we've got someone who comes in and says this is what they want to start with. As I kind of was thinking, why would you own a football club? Like if you were, had the wealth and had the opportunity to own a football club, what would be the benefit of it? Because it almost seems like you're renting. In so many ways, your landlords are the fans, because they're the ones that make decisions on whether you're part of them or not, even though you're technically the owner. So I'd really like to see what he does do, the personnel that he brings in, and the thinking around the football operations. And if that does include bringing in some Turkish players and bringing in some connections that he already has that is going to benefit the club, well, we've seen partnerships in the past. I mean, even in the Alums, when they were able to bring through Bruce the Egyptian players over, and we had Ghetto and Fadi and
Elmo with the three. Yeah,
that's right. And that was a really positive relationship. I mean, if we start seeing a Turkish 11 rolled out, and the players just certainly aren't cut out for the for the task, well, then we'll have a conversation. But it doesn't sound to me like that's the direction. So I think I would probably answer that question by saying, he seems to have the wealth, he seems to have the contacts, and some really positive Turkish connections. So let's see where that takes us. And I'm certainly, one to buckle up and hopefully enjoy the ride.
Yeah, certainly it's going to be a really interesting ride. Dan and I were talking just before we went to air about how quickly we think the ride will start, whether it will start with changes being made before the Bournemouth game or perhaps after the Bournemouth game with that fresh air for the week following that, leading up to the Swansea game. I'll start with you, Logan. I mean, this morning's result makes this a much harder question than it would have been at asking it yesterday. But where do you see McCann's future at the moment? In that clip that I played to open the episode, Ajun goes on to sort of say he hasn't made a decision on McCann just yet, and he'll make that decision in the coming days after a meeting. Sorry, actually, what I'll just do while we're talking, I'll also add in, we do have Mike with us as well. Mike, can you hear us? I think you've got yourself muted, but are you there now?
Yep, I can hear you guys. Can you hear me?
Brilliant. Yes, we can hear you. How are you?
Yeah, good. Sorry for joining late.
Yeah, no, welcome to the discussion. We were just about to talk about McCann's prospects as city manager going forward. So maybe I'll get you to kick us off on that. Where do you see him standing, particularly after this morning's result and his future with the club?
The decision's a lot harder. It's always hard to kick a manager out, especially when you picked up a result against a top 6, let alone a top 3 team in the championship. That being said, you can't forget the previous games. I think he's had 2 losing streaks. Both have been pretty impactful on our season. I think the whole takeover just calls for new management on the pitch and off the pitch. I'm personally for a new coach. I think it could just add a bit more spice, change it up a bit more. I think we win a few games, then we get comfortable, and then we go into a losing spree. So I'd like to see what I don't even know how to say his name properly, but our new owner. I'd like to see what he brings in, who he brings in, but also I think the philosophy will just change as a football club, and that's what I'm pretty excited for.
Yeah. I was sort of saying to Dan before it, I mean, probably in a perfect world, we go out and we lose 3 or 4-0 to Bournemouth, and it makes a really easy decision for him ahead of next week. Logan, do you sort of see, are you sort of in agreement with Mike maybe that we just need that fresh change?
I'm still on the fence with this one. I think Mike makes a great point, and I wouldn't really be upset to see, some pretty rapid wholesale changes. But at the same time, I think there was a very obvious change in the demeanor of City. I mean, you couldn't really play worse than that Stoke result. It's very rare that you sit in a game and you just wish for it to be over. And that's, the 70th minute mark on the weekend. That was exactly what I was hoping for. I wanted it to be done. And then you see the way that the players responded this morning against a very quality side in Blackburn, and you just go, well, it sounds like being put on notice. This, seems to be the rocket in a very short, size sample of this morning's 90 minutes, that there is some players there who really want to prove their worth. And I think Grant McCann can be, grouped in that as a manager who does want to stay and wants to continue, pulling this playing group in the right direction. So look, wouldn't be too disappointed to see him go, but equally if Fajun decided to stick with him, well, I wouldn't be too upset that way either. Yeah,
I mean, we had a few links to potential managers a couple of months ago, really, but they've gone a little bit quiet more recently. Dan, I guess like we sort of look at that first half of the season under McCann 2 seasons ago. We had Bowen, we had Grzycki. We were basically a point off the playoffs halfway through the season, and then we all know what happened after that. Do you sort of see maybe there's a possibility that with a bit of money, a few better players at his disposal, that Grant could actually be the man?
I guess, yeah, it is a tough one, because you look when we obviously had those 2, and you look at the heights that Bowen's now gone on to achieve, and how he's probably as usual now that he's left City going to get an England call up and all that sort of nonsense. But when he had players of caliber, of that quality, yes, we were within touching distance of the, or thereabouts for playoffs and looking towards a very successful season, probably more successful than we were anticipating at the time. But I guess, whether they were sold, how would he have managed had it just been that Bowen had done an ACL in that season? It makes that conversation easy to say, well, his best players were sold out from underneath him. But in an unfortunate world, right, those players can be gone for any number of reasons, and you still need to be able to find a way to work through that and get results. And obviously last time in the championship, he wasn't able to do that. Very different looking squad without probably that level of star power that, Grosicki and Bowen offered us at the time. But more, I don't know, maybe like a more down to earth squad is probably the way to put it. They seem more willing to grind out, results apart from, a handful of games. So what are we, 26 games we've played? And there's, I think, 3 games I can think of where the performances were pretty average. And that's Stoke, Blackpool, and there was one other one that
Derby, maybe?
Yeah, it could have been the Derby one where we were expecting to perform better. But to go, well, 3 games where you go, that's disappointing. Sure, there's lots of disappointing results, but the performances we've talked ad nauseum about how strong a lot of the performances have been, despite the results going against us. So I don't know. It is a tricky one. Sort of as Logan said, like if the decision was made to let Grant McCann go, it would be hard to argue against it, to say that he necessarily 100% deserved to continue. But the flip side of making the change now is, I think, there's not a lot of time for a new coach to really, or a new manager to really get up and running. Whereas, if McCann even at least gets to the end of the season, right, I think there's enough. I think there's enough within the squad, and I think McCann can do enough to secure us safety. I think we'll avoid relegation this season. If he gets to the end of the season, you let him go and you bring someone in, he's got all of, the whole preseason, the whole off season to just decide the way they want to play, bring in the players they want, bring in the staff they want, and all that, and they have time to go through that process. I think that's going to be a much better way to go about it than just pulling the plug to appease half of a fan base, or to just because it's a new day. Maybe that is the exact reason to do it, because just to create a clean slate. I don't know.
Yeah.
Man, I don't know.
It's going to be interesting, certainly. Yeah. Now, Mike, I don't know how long we've got you for, so I thought maybe before you have to jet off, we've sort of predicted, we've discussed, we've sort of denied about when the takeover is going to happen for weeks and weeks and months now. And you've always been one who's sort of said, it's not happening until it's happened. I need to see the official confirmation before I say anything, get too excited. Just before you jump off, I thought I'd get your overall thoughts. How are you feeling? How did you feel waking up this morning? Oh, he has jumped off. That's all right. I was going to get his thoughts on. Sounds like his connection cut out. That's all right. I was going to get his thoughts on the takeover. We'll see if he comes back in. Otherwise, I thought maybe we'll jump on and discuss potential new players. I think that's probably the most exciting element of the whole thing. That interview with Ajun this morning, he did finish off by saying there'll certainly be signings coming in this window, and there'll be good signings, which is always reassuring. You don't want a manager saying an owner saying he's going to make bad signings. So it's certainly going to be interesting. It sounds like we've had confirmation that the embargo is over. The debt's been repaid to the EFL, so that means that we can make additional signings, which is pretty positive news. I'll start with you, Logan, just on the potential for new signings. I guess the obvious question, is probably where do you see as the needs for us to strengthen this window?
Yeah, look, I feel like this is the prerequisite for any club, is to look for a goal scoring option. We probably do need another striker. We need somebody who's proven or prolific at at least championship level. I think that's probably the glaring hole. It seems that particularly when you buy into some of the transfer rumors, it seems like all we're doing is looking for midfielders. And currently in the defensive ranks, I think that there's probably a need for a defender or two as well. So I think we can strengthen across the board. I don't think that this squad in any way is complete. I think there's some really quality pieces that currently exist in the squad, but if you do look at where we sit on the ladder and our goals for and against, it certainly alludes to the fact that we're probably not scoring enough and certainly not defending. We've talked about on the podcast at length about our set piece woes and how defensively we've been, exposed a lot in that aspect. So I think that we can strengthen everywhere. I guess when you hear some of the signings that we're linked with, one of the most difficult things for us as fans is to work out that yardstick of, well, how much are we going to spend? Are we looking for those kind of, those £500,000 loan spells, or are we actually looking to pay a significant fee and bring in a marquee signing? What I will say is I think it's a huge opportunity for Jean to endear himself to the City faithful. Buying the club inside a transfer window. If that checkbook starts to get flashed and we see some signings come through the door that are far above and beyond what we've been used to in the past coming few years, I think that would be a very quick way to win the fan base over and to get in the right favor with the fans. So I'm excited. I think that it's a really exciting prospect that he can go in and almost pick signings from all over the place. We don't have a set prerequisite of what we actually need. We need everything. And if he's
just
willing
not
to
lead to free transfers.
yeah, that's right. Exactly.
It's gonna be a fresh pond that we're fishing in, I think, at the moment. And look, it was interesting after the FA Cup game with Everton that I saw Cenk Tosun got a photo with him. I think just purely because he knows him and as a Turkish player, he was quite happy to get a photo with the Jun. But it's sort of a strange situation or reality to be in, where your owner's a bit of a celebrity in a particular country, where players could actually be quite attracted to join a club because of the owner. Like, you sort of think normally it's maybe the other players you've got, maybe it's the manager, maybe it's the club itself. But to have the owner be maybe the big draw card is quite an unusual one, I think. Dan, I guess a lot of the names we've been linked to so far have been more midfielders, strikers, which I think we do need some strikers in the door. I don't think, apart from that link to Brian Reynolds, the American at Roma, don't think I've seen any defender links, but I think that's probably an area that we need to be looking to strengthen.
Yeah, look, honestly, we should do a Newcastle to Burnley. We go to Derby. We do them a favour. We help them pay off their debts. We take Curtis Davies, and then is it Tom Lawrence, their striker, who's apparently pretty decent? Yep. Take him off their hands. 2 birds, 1 stone.
Hey, look, we're just trying to help them
lock
out,
in that
right?
bottom 3. Problem solved. No, look, I think centre back, we definitely, we've talked. It's been about 2 years. We've been talking about needing an experienced centre back to help these young guys through that process.
I'm trying to think. Who was the last experienced centre back we had? I feel like it might have even been Dawson or someone.
No.
Well, I'm going to say experienced. I mean, like 30 plus years old.
Last championship season, and we brought him in from, was it Villa or something for the year or the half?
Oh, Elphick, that's right. Yeah, it's probably Elphick.
I think that he could have been it. So I do know some players after they leave the club. No, I think, but I don't know. It's interesting. There's lots of links to Turkish players, but I think also it's easy to get carried away with this idea of having this Turkish 11, but the EFL has rules in place to, they've got to be, it would be essentially signing the Turkish international team if that were the case, because they've all got to be at international level to get a working visa to play football in England anyway. And
I think especially since Brexit, or actually I know, because Turkey's not even in the EU. So yeah, it's not even like it's France or something where they're at least sort of connected. It's even harder.
So it's a whole thing. So getting linked with 28 different Turkish players, I don't know. I don't know what's going to happen, but the Pesic or whatever, Alexander Pesic.
Yeah,
who's
I was just about to ask about him. Yeah,
he. I mean, I haven't looked too much, but the numbers look good, and he's done it at a couple of different clubs, which is always a good sign. I was going to ask about him because we've got him, we've got Marquee, a few others linked as well. We were sort of talking last night, and Mitch was saying, I was saying with Mitch, it's an interesting career path that Pesic has had. He's kind of gone all over the place: France, Italy, across to Turkey, Korea,
all sorts of places to end up in England, in Hull, would be an interesting sort of career path. But Logan, we were sort of talking just before about the sort of the caliber of players that we've been linked to. I think Pesic is one that a few journalists have now come out and said, this is a bit more of a credible link than, your 14 million pound signings. This is like a 2 million sort of euro signing. You sort of said before, if we just get a marquee signing or something like that in, do you sort of have that sense, like if we get one or two sort of decent, solid signings in, and then maybe spend the rest of the window re-signing our current players to new deals?
Yeah, well, and that's right. And I think that I also saw the article written about the John saying that, Honeyman's contract is one of the priorities for him. And I think that, again, when you talk about looking for an opportunity to endear yourself to the fan base, I mean, George Honeyman is probably, if not, the most favourable City player amongst the fans at the moment. He's, certainly one that we enjoy watching week in, week out, because you know what you've come to expect from him. So to be encompassing, looking after those key players that are there, and then if you were to bring in a marquee signing or two, I think that would be a really good way to go about it. But again, further to kind of what Dan was saying earlier, if you think about the timing, I mean, realistically, it would be a pretty big stretch to still consider City a playoff team this season. I mean, it's certainly not out of the realms of possibility, but to start throwing the checkbook around now, and really looking to kind of bring in those big signings to, finish, say, 10th or something, go on a really good run. Is that the wisest, use of business resources when you could kind of, trust the current crop? As Dan said, I think I agree that I'd be really surprised to see this group go down. I think that they are certainly a mid-table championship side, and this morning proved that they can mix it with anyone in the division. So whether the right time to go and chase marquee players is this particular transfer window, I'm not necessarily sure. But, it certainly would be a quick fire way for people to continue to jump on the optimism train of Ajourne's ownership.
Yeah, certainly. And I guess, Dan, just finishing off on the player point of view, as Logan was saying there, I guess Honeyman's probably the priority for a new contract. We're even saying yesterday, it's sort of a broken record just around the player contract management. It's maybe the most exciting part of the new regime will be player contract management done right. We'll start to see players re-sign to new deals. We'll start to see extensions for players that the supporters want to keep around the club, rather than seeing them whittle away to nothing and leave on free contracts. Yeah,
look, the free contract or the letting players leave on a free debacle, hopefully that is ended. Hopefully, if that is all we get out of this new regime, I'll be happy. If it's just contract negotiations are resolved in a timely and efficient manner, in a way that benefits the club and the fans and the players involved, then I'll be happy. And I think, like, sort of just to touch on what Logan was saying about players coming in, like, even a 1 million pound signing, a 2 million pound striker is a far cry above what we have at the moment. We got Tyler Smith, who we essentially had released from Sheffield. Tom Eaves, who we got on a free from Gillingham.
From Gillingham. Yeah.
McCanns, who we just sold, but who we got on a free from Bolton.
Yeah.
Like, there's not been a lot of actual investment. So anything, is going to be better than nothing, essentially. So, I mean, and there's not just to say there's anything necessarily wrong with it free if it's done right, but I think we've dipped into that market far too frequently towards the end of the Allen regime. So, looking forward to seeing changes in a lot of the way in our recruitment, in our retention. I think it's going to be interesting to see how this all plays out. But I'm looking forward
that's
to
a really good segue into as I wrap things up here before we head off. I wanted to get from each of you, maybe starting with Logan, if there's one thing that we can see from this new regime over, call it the next 6 weeks, give him a reasonable amount of time to achieve something, whether it's an engagement with the supporters trust, or whether it's a better ticketing scheme, whether it's players, whether it's manager, whatever it is, what's the one thing above all else that you really want to see achieved over the next 6 weeks?
I think it still comes back to kind of what I said at the start. I just think it's actually winning the fans over. I think that, like, you've kind of, in that question, you've alluded to some of the things that may actually do that. But what I'd really like to see is, and it sounds like Ajun's got that mentality of actually coming in and finding out what the real beef is. I mean, I suspect that the real beef is just the Allams in general, like just their presence and a lot of the things that they had said to people in the past. People just had adopted that approach as, I'm not going to give them my money anymore. And so if Ajun's come in and talked about this approach of wanting to, get the fans and all push in the same direction, we'll find out what those things are. So it may be the ticketing, scheme. It may be a cheaper ticket price for one day to actually try and fill the MKM. Like, I just don't know what that is. But if he listens to the fans and he finds out on the ground from the main voices that are in the whole supporters groups and the different bodies, I think that would be the most important thing. And I guess I know that's number one, but the thing that I would tack onto that is some really smart kind of contract thing. So whether it does look like signing Longman, extending Honeyman's contract, making sure KLP stays. If he starts to do a few of those things, I think that'll really support the work that he's doing with the fans. So a combination of those two, if it's not asking too much.
And Dan, what would you like to see sort of number one in your wish list over the next 6 weeks?
Look, I'll go real simple. Bums on seats in the MKM. I think we saw this morning, with 13,500 supporters, how it was rocking. You could hear the chants on the stream on the telecast. So I think whether that is, I think Logan alluded to it, cheap ticket days or whatever, whatever that looks like, but building that atmosphere within the stadium, getting it back to, getting the community to coming back to the stadium and enjoying those the matches and the game days, because I think everyone in football has talked about how much of a struggle last year was without any supporters in the grounds, and how disappointing it was for us to win our first league title without any fans around. Well, I think now we're at that fresh slate time. We got to be. I really do want to be pushing towards 20,000. For just 20,000 fans in the stadium for a match, because you look at, there are other clubs who are in worse situations than us who are getting still able to fill their stadiums. So and I think and I think that from looking at Twitter and Facebook and everything in between, you see lots of people who have said, as Logan alluded to, that they just went, I'm not going anymore, and I haven't gone for 6 years because of the Allams. But people were saying it's the first game they've been to in 6 years, or in 2,000 days, or however they were carrying it off. So I think hopefully we'll see a lot of that older fan base return to the MKM, and that bolstered with hopefully new Turkish supporter base perhaps will boost those attendance figures, and they'll get behind the boys, and we'll get some more good results.
Well, that's it. I mean, I think there is quite a significant Turkish contingent in Hull, so that's going to be really interesting to see if that sort of attracts new supporters to the ground as well. And look, I'll make it all three of us and say bums on seats, filling out the MKM. I think 14K or 13 and a half, whatever it was this morning, I thought sounded amazing on TV. Opening the West Upper, getting the whole ground filled out if we can, because it all sort of rolls into each other. Like Ajun was sort of saying in terms of pulling in the same direction. If we get a full stadium, if we get a really big sort of attendance starting to turn up at the ground, more players are going to be keen to sign. Players are going to perform better. You look at our performance today against Stoke, it's chalk and cheese, and maybe it's not all down to the supporters, but you can't say that the support that we got this morning didn't play a part in the way that the players played their game. And then also to borrow from Logan as well, I think, contract situation, if we start to see, we don't need to see the squad torn down. We don't need to see McCann leave and players kicked out, all that sort of thing necessarily. What I'd rather see is the core being re-signed to longer deals, Longman on a permanent, maybe Baxter on a permanent, maybe getting that core of players identified and given the 4 or 5 year sort of contracts, like Greaves and Lewis Potter and Honeyman and Doherty and those sorts of guys will be around, and McLaughlin will be around for years, hopefully. That sort of positive step in the club would be fantastic. So look, it's been an exciting start already. 2-0 win against Blackburn. Can't complain with that. It all seems to be off to a pretty perfect start. So got lots to look forward to ahead of us, I'm sure. But thank you for joining me to discuss it, Logan.
Thanks, Alex. Yeah, it's good to be here.
No worries. And thanks, Dan, as well.
No worries. I just wanted to point out that Ajun's been to 2 games and they both had huge performances, huge crowds. So
yeah, that's right.
we've
We've got to get
wins,
into
but
every
then we
game.
didn't win
You
against
can't miss
Everton.
any.
Felt like a win even though we lost.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. It's got to get along to every game, I think, from now on. Would be fantastic. But no, look, thanks to both of you for joining us, and also thanks to Mike who joined us briefly. It's a shame he couldn't stick around for a bit longer, but it was good to have him all the same. And thank you guys for listening along. If you've liked this episode, give us a like, hit subscribe if you haven't already. Let us know your thoughts. What are you excited about with the new regime as well? But until next time, come on, City.